All right, welcome back to Cannabis Chat Live on Friday here at Pro Cannabis Media. David Rabinovitz and I are here every Friday from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern to talk about the emerging cannabis industry. And today we are focusing on the Garden State, New Jersey, as they continue to try and start their adult use legalization that was voted in on Election Day. And now, of course, we've got the room filled with New Jersey people because both Rick and Paul stuck around, and I appreciate that. But we're joined by our friend Rob Mejia, professor at Stockton University, as well as our community harvest guy. And now we're joined by the editor of Heady, New Jersey, Heady NJ. His name is Dan Ulloa. I hope I did it right. Did I do Ulloa?
Yes, you did.
I've been practicing that. So Dan, thank you so much. I want to start with you, if you don't mind, Dan. Looking at it from your perspective, how would you describe the state of the legislation right now as it's starting to head up to the governor's desk?
So we're in a really weird position right now, and we've been in this position for more than a month now, more than 30 days, certainly, whereby the legislature passed the bills. They passed the enabling legislation and the criminalization legislation December 17th. These are the bills that at one point had stalled, where Governor Murphy had to sit down with Senate President Steve Sweeney and our Speaker of the Assembly, Craig Coughlin. They sat down, they made an agreement, and that's the bill that we now have. That it took some time. We had our hearings. We had plenty of hearings, Appropriations Committee, Senator Scutari, Judiciary hearings, and the bill passed the legislature, and here we are in this weird position where the governor is like, "Oh, I made an error. We didn't actually read this. Must have said." Now he wants to have a penalty on minors, on rather those who are under 21 and they're caught with a little cannabis. What do we do with that? You make them a little fine? You make them go to drug rehab? You make them go to community service? Or do you just yell at them a little and scare the fear of God in them? That's really like this issue that's really sticking here, and it's been really difficult. The issue came to a head right for New Year's, whereby Governor Murphy announced out of nowhere he wasn't going to sign the bill when everybody, I think, was waiting for a signing ceremony. Details there, and now we have to pass a cleanup bill. So they obliged him to pass committees, but we don't have the votes in the legislature for cannabis for this cleanup bill because they can't really agree. Because some people say even like a slap on the wrist. What's the slap on the wrist to somebody? Is the start of like down this road whereby we create a second class of citizens who are felons who are disenfranchised.
Gotcha. Hey, and Rob Mejia is with us as well. Rob, one of the things we were talking about with Paul Josephson, the attorney that's with us from Duane Morris, was the 18 versus 21. As someone who is a college professor, okay, what really is the difference between an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old when it comes to maturity and underage drinking or underage use of cannabis? I mean, the 18-year-old is really that much different than the 21-year-old?
Well, we're working with college students on a daily basis. It just comes down to the individual. There are some 18-year-olds who are more mature than you and I, and there are some who really feel like they are so very young. I mean, the biggest thing is this brings up one of the big issues. It's what about the kids? And the thing is, you don't want to encourage underage use, and that the brain is still developing until age 25. And actually, the earlier you start before the age of 18, those become the more problematic years, and especially if there's real high potency product that they're using. I mean, my own feeling is that I heard a proposal that makes sense, and it's the way they handle tobacco. And that is, if the person who sells it to you, they're the ones that get the penalty. And I think you should leave the minors alone. The minors have enough to do just trying to become a functioning, well-adjusted adult. So I would say that if you have somebody who's selling the product to them, they're the ones that should get the fine. And not the minor. Just warn the minor, let them go on their way, and focus on the seller.
Well, there you go. David, you got anything for us? I'm waiting to see. I want to make sure you're still awake and with us.
I'm still awake and with us. No, I'm actually curious about where, like Dan talked about, where things are at. When do you think New Jersey, to anybody who's any of our guests, when do you think they're actually going to work out the regulations? I mean, it just seems they get to that point and then it falls apart again. Then they get there and it falls apart again. I mean, it's another one of these things where the citizens say, this is what we want of the people that we've elected. And then the people that they elected say, you're really not that bright. We need to redo it for you. You know, that's what happened up here. And it looks like it's going that way down in New Jersey. When do you think they'll actually get this resolved so you've got an industry that can start?
Ask someone directly, David.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Dan.
There you go.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one, I'll say. Right now, we are in this weird limbo period. Technically, we're legal right now. There's a few people calling themselves legal right now, selling a few things here and there. Ideally, like to work it out, I think like in the next couple weeks on some level, and we'll have it. Like everybody wants it, and they're right there. They just have this one little thing to do. And I think what the problem is, like we have a very contentious politics as being New Jersey in our state house. So unfortunately, I think it's one of the issues that mired in the larger issues between the governor and the more progressive governor and the more moderate state senate president, who, you know, there's a little one-upsmanship. There's been some issues there where they were fighting, especially over X credits for companies. That was a big issue. And millionaires taxes, that was a really big issue. Where they didn't really have common ground. It took a while to make a deal, and the acrimony from it hurt cannabis as like a secondary issue. So I think that's like one of the reasons it might be we're seeing that way. And we're also living in a pandemic. That's slowing things down. I can't go hanging around the state house running into legislatures the way like I imagine I would have been otherwise.
So
I don't know. I don't know.
That'll probably help. It'll go along a lot faster, Dan. If I can weigh in on this from the lawyer's standpoint, the timing on this under the bill is that, and the bill that's sitting on the governor's desk, is that once he signs it, the Cannabis Commission will have 6 months to adopt regulations that will become automatically and immediately effective. So in a perfect world, if the governor signs a bill, let's say it takes place in February, hopefully by July or August, the 12 current licensees would be in a position, subject to approvals from their towns in which their stores are located, but they would hopefully by July or August be in a position where they could open the doors to all adult customers. Having done this stuff for 30 years in New Jersey, regulations take time. And there's a lot that needs to be regulated here. And what's unknown is how much of that work has already been done by the staff in anticipation. So, if we're lucky, we get it this summer. History says regulations take some time. But I certainly know, the governor's team, I think, is anxious to get this up and running and rolling as quickly as possible. And then, I think the follow-up question is, okay, that's fine for the 12 licensees. What about the larger industry? What about all the other folks who've been waiting so long? The folks who applied in 2019, who are still waiting to hear on their medical license applications. And the answer is a little more complicated there. But, the 2019 licensee, 2019 applicants do have a court hearing coming up on February 2nd, and hopefully those applications will get unstuck and the department will be in a position to award some more licenses in the coming months. For those who've not already applied, the way the bill is set up, the new commission cannot put out a request for licenses until two things happen. Till the regulations that I said take 6 months are adopted by the commission. Then there has to be a 30-day roadshow during which the state has to go out and promote to all kinds of communities how they can participate in the application process. And so hopefully there'll be the opportunity to apply come September for pure recreational licenses.
I want to ask Rob something because he and I have talked about this before. Is the legislature actually reaching out to those that are in the business or someone like yourself as a teacher to educate themselves more about this issue? Or are they just going into this blind and saying, oh, we got to do this because of that? And what's the read on that?
They are reaching out to a few people, but really not on a huge scale. I do have a friend of mine who was on the media panel that we were on, Faye Coleman. And Faye Coleman actually is one of the advisors. And so she does get calls from legislators all the time, and they'll ask her basic things like how many grams are in a joint, what's the difference between hemp and marijuana. I mean, a lot of basic definitions, and then some things that are a little deeper too. So there are some people who are pursuing education, and there actually recently was a call from 2 of the senators to talk about whether we should be putting education into the middle and high schools for kids. But the other thing that I think is missing is that we're not talking a lot about state education. Every time that any state legalizes adult use, you see some problems that crop up all the time. I'll give you a quick example. One is the edibles. That once you have edibles in the market, you will see calls to poison control centers increase. And actually in New Jersey, we're already seeing that even though we're not, well, we kind of are or not, in legal use. So in 2018, there were 14 calls to the poison center for kids who ingested THC, gummies, candy, etc. In 2019, there were 40. In 2020, there were 85. Most of that could be mitigated by, could be taken care of by parents being more responsible about stashing their products. And then also the big thing is about education, to let people know that actually what happens with edibles. So I think that I wish I would hear more conversations about how we need to put in a wholesale education program for the state of New Jersey for parents, and then we can talk about the schools as well. But I do think that you have to start with basic things. We're going to have tourists that will come into New Jersey, and let's let them know what they can and can't do right from the start. So again, I think education has been lacking in the conversation.
That's an interesting observation. Hey, Paul, I got a question for you. Have they seated all the commissioners? Do you have a full commission down there now?
We don't yet have a full commission. We have, I think, of the 5, 3 have been specifically and formally identified and nominated. There are 2 more pending appointees yet to come. Those 2 appointees are coming from would be coming from the governor.
Now, when you say nominated, does that mean they're actually seated and approved, or they're trying to get them approved?
Well, the good news here is that the way that the bill set it up is that this initial round of typically appointments to a board like this in New Jersey are subject to advice and consent in our state Senate, kind of like a Supreme Court nominee would be federally, or a cabinet member. But in this bill, in order to get up and running quickly, the appointments are automatic. So as soon as they are named, they are good. They're good to go. They don't have to do any advice and consent. That being said, the commission has not formally stood itself up yet. They don't, although they have a technical majority, 3 out of the 5. The chairwoman who has been appointed is one of the governor's nominees, and they've not convened the commission to start doing their work. And frankly, I think that's a function of they don't want to start doing their work until the bill is the adult use bill is signed.
Do they have any staff yet?
They do have staff. The most notably the current assistant commissioner at the Department of Health, who is our cannabis czar, Jeff Brown, has been tapped to be the executive director of the new commission. He's in my view, a great guy who's done wonders in turning around New Jersey's awful program. It hasn't been perfect by a long shot, but that's not all Jeff's fault. And Jeff has a very capable staff around him at the DOH currently in the medical program, who are expected to all move over to the commission. So there will be staffing right away. And I know that they are going to have to expand that staff dramatically in order to deal with the amount of work that they have and the amount of applications that they're going to have coming in there.
I'd like to go back to education. Can I go back to education for a second here? Because I do get to rail about this a lot, excuse me, on this show. And I still have yet to ever hear about any kind of in school or out to the public service announcements about both the positive effects of this cannabis plant and also the responsible use of this plant. There is nothing in place here in Massachusetts. Traditional media is still shying away from this. No one is talking about how this plant can enhance your life. Now, let's go back to the kids. There are kids out there who are sick, okay? And there are documented case after case after case of a lot of these kids' parents' last resort medication is cannabis. Where I'm going with this is it's going back to education. I believe it was Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Everybody knows that moms dictate a lot of things around the house, okay? Moms have been cannabis advocates in Colorado, in Washington State. It's documented. What I'd like to see is a lot of mothers trying to get education in the schools. And a lot of people know this about me. One of the things that pisses me off more than anything else about teenagers is the binge drinking that goes on. They don't drink to get drunk. They drink to pass out. So they're out of control. And that's alcohol. Any parent that I talk to about the dangers between these two products that teenagers are going to get their hands on, do not think just because there's going to be a misdemeanor of $400 if a teenager is walking around with a couple of joints in his pocket, that's going to happen. It's not. Kids are always looking to push the envelope when they're told that they cannot do something, and they're going to do it. And by the way, there are adults out there. Rob, you mentioned the emergency room visits, okay? Edibles are dangerous. You have to learn to start low and go slow.
Yeah.
But where's that messaging in the public, right? It doesn't happen. We're not allowing it. And it's not, in no state do I hear of any public service announcements. And I'm just throwing that out there and I'll go to Rob first, because I know he has an opinion about that.
I do. It is sorely lacking. I mean, Colorado has a little bit of, I actually read the curriculum that Colorado gives to their middle school and their high schoolers. And it actually, for the most part, was okay, pretty straightforward. They did have a couple of alarmist things in there, but they did miss out on a couple of big opportunities. And as you mentioned, Jimmy, even in New Jersey, we have a couple qualifying conditions that definitely speak to children. Autism is one of them. Epilepsy is another one. So there certainly are children who are benefiting from cannabis, but nowhere in that curriculum did it ever acknowledge that. So I'm thinking, if you happen to be a student and you happen to be one who has to take that medicine, that's probably another way that you may well get shunned. And you're taking a course that says, for the most part, that what you're doing is negative. But for you, it's a huge benefit. And Colorado also does some public service announcements, but they're more like what you can do in the state and what you can't. They're not really talking about the benefits or many positives. It's just basically to keep tourists out of trouble is what it is. That's all.
Right. And shouldn't that education of our children, this is what alcohol does to your brain, this is what cannabis can do to your brain. You have to share that information with the kids, because they're not going to make smart decisions in their teenage years. They're just not. I know I didn't, and I don't know about you guys, but point is, all right, we do need to educate as parents, as responsible users of this plant, advocates for this plant. We have a responsibility to educate young people about this, okay? And I'm talking the benefits and the dangers. Balance it. If you look at the alcohol versus cannabis debate, it's really a no-brainer. It really is, even though both affect the brain.
I do think one interesting approach would be to go more to the parents, because I do find that even in my classes, one of the very best things that happened is I had a few students who said, my parents were really kind of anti me taking this course. They didn't really want me to engage with cannabis. They didn't know about it. They certainly didn't know about the history of prohibition. They didn't know about the racism that's baked into it. And over time, my students began to teach them about the truths about cannabis. And the nice part was that you saw the parents come around And at the last session, I actually invite parents that they can come in and hear the class too, so that we can answer their questions. Because I think that it does trickle down. They then tell their neighbors, they tell their kids, they tell their nephews, nieces, everybody. So I think that's an important part. It's harder to get to the parents, I think, but it would be pretty amazing if we could put together some educational program that engaged public, parents, and kids. That would be phenomenal.
Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.